Hello. If you're like me and you have friends with whom you discuss the relative allocation ratios and resource allocation problems that India faces, and consequently the impossible problem that India has in terms of having a viable union of these disparate states, you're likely to have people on the one side who probably are South Indians who complain that the union government is unfair to them, and then another set of people who, like they call themselves nationalists, and probably argue that bulk of the resources which are being sort of sent over to the Indo-Gangetic plains deserve that, and somewhere in between, somebody is always bound to say, "What about Maharashtra?" Right? What about it? Because the argument that people from southern India put forward is that they send a lot of monies to the union government, they get very little in return. And they argue that the reason why they do this is because the union government and its allocation formulae have a perverse incentive built into them, which punishes good governance and kind of rewards bad governance. Ergo, the logic being that southern India gets a lot less, whereas the states in the Indo-Gangetic plains, which generally have poor socioeconomic indicators, end up getting a lot more. Right? So in all this, what about Maharashtra seems like a good question, simply because, well, Maharashtra is a relatively prosperous state. It sends probably the highest amount of money to the union government in terms of tax collections. It is well governed. It has relatively good socioeconomic indices, and yet nobody in Maharashtra seems to complain. And so the implicit question in what about Maharashtra is that, well, if Maharashtra isn't complaining, why are you people from the south complaining? Right? That's the underlying assumption. So let's look at what the data says. If you look at the data, between the 12th and the 15th Finance Commissions, which roughly covers the last 2 decades, you see that states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, all of these states have had sort of a declining trend. That is, for every successive Finance Commission, they've generally had a lower and lower allocation ratio, which is the reason why they kind of have this agitational politics towards the union government, which is that, whenever there is a declining trend, people are going to sort of feel insulted by it and kind of launch into some version of a confrontational politics. This has been, evident in the way in which finance ministers of southern India have kind of collectively said that several times. It's been evident in the way in which the politics of several of these states have worked out. This has been true for Kerala and Tamil Nadu for a very long time, but recently in the Karnataka assembly elections, this did come to the fore, despite it being actually fought between two national parties, right? Whereas you don't hear this noise in Maharashtra. Right? So your friend who asks, what about Maharashtra, not only has a point in terms of Maharashtra's contribution to the national economy and so on and so forth, but he also has also has a point in terms of this not being a active ingredient of the politics of Maharashtra. So why is that? If you look at the allocation ratios, just like the allocation ratio of the southern states have been on a negative trend over the last 20 years, the allocation ratio of Maharashtra in that time period has actually been on a positive trend. It went from 5% to about 6.3% between the 12th and the 15th Finance Commissions. So 5% originally, we were probably being unfair to Maharashtra back then. But ever since then, it's been on a slight upward trend. And whenever things slightly get better when compared to the past, people are likely to, not have this sort of antipathy towards the union government. People will think that, well, things are getting better, so hopefully they'll get even better, right? Whereas the opposite is true for southern India. Right? And that's the reason why this kind of agitational politics does not exist in Maharashtra, whereas it exists in southern India. But more importantly, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is this the case? Right? Like, why is it that Maharashtra, a relatively prosperous large state which sends a lot of money to the union government, getting enough in return, or at least the trend of it getting monies from one finance commission to the other in the past 20 years seems to be going up, whereas the opposite is happening in southern India? The reason, just like most other reasons for much of India's policy issues, is demography, which is that, the 15th Finance Commission took what is 2011 census data for all its population calculations, right? Previously, in the 14th Finance Commission, they took a little bit of about 10% of the 2011 data, and before that, it was all 1971 data. Between the years 1971 and 2011, Southern India, and particularly states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, grew by double-digit rates in terms of their population growth. Kerala, for instance, grew by 56% in that 40-year period. Tamil Nadu grew by 75% in that 40-year period. The highest growth, which sort of happens in the Indo-Gangetic plains, that's in a different stratosphere. Rajasthan, for instance, grew at 166%, right? So leave that aside. But Maharashtra, interestingly, sits in the middle, sits pretty, and it grew at about 123% in terms of population growth in those 40 years, which basically puts it in a relatively good position because of the way in which the allocation ratios are calculated. That is, the allocation ratio, which is the ratio in which the union divides the monies, at least the Finance Commission monies across the various states from the divisible pool, uses population in its calculations so significantly. In fact, it accounts for about 75% of the weightage in that calculation formula. So that being the case, and given that Maharashtra has kind of crossed that relative threshold in terms of its population, it seems to have impacted the formulae such that it is on an upward trajectory, whereas the southern state, by virtue of where they are in terms of population growth, seem to be on a downward trend. And that is the reason.